Hi everyone, so the Season 5 PTR patch notes are out. I just went through this for a few hours on my stream, discussing this with my chat, trying to understand the impact on all of the builds, on the entire meta and so on, and I have collected some notes. Now this does look like a lot, but I will break it down for you in as short as possible basically, and I'll try to keep it as concise as I can. That being said, there is a lot of stuff in this patch, and in general, the campfire chat looked very positive. A lot of people are very excited for it. The season looks amazing. There's a new feature coming, Helltide changes that are amazing, quality of life changes, boss changes, lots of good stuff in there. And here we're talking more about the meta and the balance. That can change a lot. The PTR will go live sometime next week on Tuesday. It will last for 1 week. And I absolutely expect we're going to see a lot of adjustments on balancing on the PTR, after the PTR, before the season starts at the very least, because it is definitely out of whack a little bit. So some of the things I'm about to explain will not necessarily stay that way, and I do expect that the devs are listening to some of this feedback, because it does look pretty dire for some classes, while others are kind of like up in heaven right now. So with that being said, let's get into it. First, I want to talk about the biggest winners and losers and the overall ranking here. You can see that already. We have the biggest winner is the Rogue. So Rogues are already pretty powerful in Season 4, and they're getting a lot of really cool stuff. They're getting some interesting new uniques. They're getting a massive buff to survivability thanks to some Dark Shroud changes. Flurry meta, potentially. Flurry is getting a huge buff, and a bunch of like little things and, you know, kind of interesting buffs that could actually produce new builds, produce new ways of playing old builds. So in general, Rogues are looking really nice. That being said, I don't think that Rogues might be the strongest class. They might still be number 2 after the Barbs. Barbs have just like not really received substantial enough nerfs. In particular, Gushing Wounds was not touched at all, which is kind of the biggest perpetrator here when it comes to making Barbs overpowered right now. And I was kind of surprised about this, to be honest. That might still happen, because Gushing Wounds is just like such a ridiculously powerful key passive that outshines every other key passive by a factor of up to a few dozen or even 100 times in terms of power level gains, basically. So this is something that I expect will be addressed, but maybe not. There might also be some shadow nerfs to the Barbs that were not necessarily mentioned in the patch notes, because, for example, the exact changes to temper recipes were not really mentioned. We don't have any numbers on those. It is not unlikely that, for example, the Bash Cleave temper has been adjusted and is now a lower value. It is not unlikely that Flay, now that it has moved to a utility temper, does not actually increase the bleed duration anymore, just the buff duration. So those two builds might have just really dropped in power. And there are some other like kind of tiny changes here and there that might affect the Barb as well. So we'll see, but without the Gushing Wounds change, Barbs will be top dog, and I think there's not a huge doubt about that. Now for the Druids, one big takeaway here is the Shepherd's aspect meta is dead. That has now become a companion buff instead of a player buff, and this means that for many builds you now get +3 skills on your Barb, which are mostly defensive skills, I guess, making you extremely tanky. On top of that, those defensive skills has also been buffed. So for example, Bulwark now scales with your maximum life, not with your base life anymore. That is pretty huge. Also some small stuff, for example, like Cyclone Armor has a bigger value now. Debilitating Roar was nerfed, but you have like more baseline survivability. So Druids are going to be very tanky. They're going to be in a pretty good spot survivability wise, and the damage should not really shift that much. So they're not going to be like omega powerful, but in the overall picture, I rank them at number 3 currently. And there is a landslide build. So that has already been kind of a thing and brewing here and there. And that is getting ridiculous buffs. So this kind of like sophisticated balance that Druids currently have in Season 4 is going to be upset by just one build outshining everything else that Druid has to offer, which is a bit sad. But we'll see, maybe there's going to be some tweaks to some of the other builds. At least for Season 4, they were like fairly balanced. And in Season 5, there's probably a really crazy landslide build, and then everything else a little bit like one step below that, basically. Then we have the Necros. So they are not really receiving all that much crazy stuff, but they get a quasi mobility skill now. So there's a mobility aspect that allows you to move with Sever. So that sounds really fun. I'm really excited to try this. In general, there's a bunch of really powerful Necro mobility aspects. They're also getting like a huge mobility aspect for a Golem playstyle. They're also getting another one with Blood Mist and Evade, where you can like evade Blood Mist and evade while in Blood Mist, and then evade again when they come out of it. So it sounds kind of like, you know, a quasi teleport or dash kind of ability there with a few button presses. That could be kind of interesting. And in general though, Necros are not really looking all too powerful, at least right now. There have been some nerfs in particular to the blighted aspect. That was a huge multiplier to many builds, the blight build, even minion builds, stuff like Sever, so a bunch of things that are just kind of like losing a bit of power there. And a few little buffs for like blood builds, for example, but they're really far down in the current state of the game, and I don't really expect them to be uplifted enough to, you know, actually be relevant. So for now, it's not looking that great for the Necros, but again, this might change a little bit. And finally, we have the Sorcs. So that's an oof, really oof. So number one, Perma Flame Shield is gone, so that was expected. I guess everyone saw that coming, but I think there was not really enough compensation for that nerf. In fact, they have actually nerfed some other defensive tools like Ice Armor. Ice Armor now no longer refills itself when you deal damage, so it's like a one-time big barrier, and then it kind of slowly depletes as you take damage. And this is a pretty heavy nerf. I've actually played a lot of Sorc this season, and I have not touched these Perma in Flame Shield builds. I've mostly been relying on Ice Armor and other barriers, and I can definitely tell that this will be felt. So Sorc's survivability is kind of down, and the damage is kind of down, and they did not really receive a big benefit. In fact, there were some nerfs because, as I mentioned earlier, they have been capping a lot of legendary paragon nodes across all classes. There's like a lot of caps now that Blizzard has put in place to, I guess, make sure that stuff is not really scaling super out of control in some cases. I kind of understand that, especially maybe if I look at the expansion where we might get, you know, higher stat values and World Tier 5 or something like that. It does make sense to kind of keep things in like a realm of reason, but they have also kept things of currently underperforming builds, and that includes, for example, the Burning Instinct Paragon board. So that is also now heavily capped and will impact Firebolt and even Incinerate. That is a somewhat weak build currently as well. So there's not just really been enough buffs to compensate for all that stuff on the Sorc class, and it's not looking great. The one thing that does look really good on Sorcs is Chain Lightning. There's a new unique for it that sounds completely busted, and it might be like a Chain Lightning meta. That might even be one of the best builds of the entire season, but everything else so far is a huge question mark. There's a bit of potential here for like Arclash maybe. They got a really nice temper now, but probably not enough. There's a bit of potential for Hydra maybe. Hydra got something interesting as well, as like a summoner build basically. But outside of that, I don't really see all too much hype for the Sorcs right now. So that kind of wraps up the overall picture here. I will also go through the individual classes now. I've already explained a bunch of these topics that I will cover now, so I'm gonna kind of rapid fire through some of those points here, just gonna give my quick opinion. Of course, it's not like all fully mapped out just yet. As I mentioned, we will work on this, we will theory craft, you know, there's going to be a lot of stuff and we don't know right now, hidden changes, stuff that didn't make it into patch notes and so on. So there's definitely some unknowns here, but at least from the looks of it right now, this is kind of what it will be. Now, that being said, there are some changes coming that we know are coming, but we don't know what will happen exactly, which is uniques. So uniques are getting generally massive buffs in Season 5, and most of them will not be on the PTR, and they will be rather in the final patch. So I think it's also not unlikely that there will be a lot of adjustments to uniques that might benefit, for example, Necro and Sorc, and maybe Druids more than some of the other classes. So I would definitely expect that to happen, to kind of bring those builds in line with where they should be. In general, I would expect some uniques to be very, very powerful, especially for some of those underperforming builds. Like if we talk, for example, Fireball, the stuff of Endless Rage, I would definitely expect this to become a pretty crazy item, because Fireball is like really down here, and if they want to lift it up somehow and make that unique also desirable, then that will probably be a pretty massive item after it has been adjusted. So this is like one of those examples. They didn't like talk about that stuff in particular, but I expect that this will be the same treatment for many of those unique items. And again, we don't know the temper recipe changes. There might be some hidden stuff there with both buffs and nerfs. Now let's go rapid fire through the different classes here. I talked about a bunch of these points, starting with the Barb here. So we might have, you know, a bit of a tweaking here with the bleeds, but there is a cap on hemorrhage, but now you also can cast your Rupture more often, so it kind of cancels each other out, I would say. Flay might be dead, we'll see about that. Whirlwind now scales with attack speed, and you also pull enemies much more frequently with the Grasping Whirlwind aspect, so that could be really fun for a Whirlwind build. So right now, again though, this is carried by Gushing Moons, so we'll see if something happens to that key passive. There is a new unique for Iron Maelstrom, so the Kratos Barb is becoming more of a reality. I've actually played that a little bit in Season 4, and it was really fun, but Iron Maelstrom doesn't really have like any endgame viable damage output, just like any other unique, just like any other ultimate skill basically. It is just not really good enough for the pit. However, for something like a Helltide build, where you just like press Iron Maelstrom maybe for 5 seconds or so, that can be ridiculously fun, so I'm kind of looking forward to trying that. Thorns Barb might be kind of dead, I'm not sure exactly. There was a bug fix for Needle Flare that might be very impactful. I can't really tell how much that is. Also, Rumble is getting nerfed, so this can now only go to 3 Earthquakes. So I guess this will also impact Thorns Barb quite a bit, and potentially some other builds where you were leaping around all the time. I think that's a very good change, because that leap playstyle did not seem fun to me. And I also heard the same from other people. There's going to be a lot of better utility tempers. You can now have the Earthquake Duration, for example, as utility temper, Flay, Frenzy. So a bunch of buffs you can get there, for example. Makes those basic skills a bit more desirable as well. And you can still become immortal, it seems, with Martial Vigor and Guttural Yell Temper. So if you have enough ranks of those, you can achieve 100% damage reduction for either yourself permanently or for, I think this works for party members as well, with Guttural Yell. So that's pretty OP. Then we have the Druids. I talked about they become very tanky, and the Shepherd's meta is gone. There's some other little stuff here. So for example, now Lightning Storm scales with attack speed. They have these new utility tempers, that's kind of cool. Clarity ranks on their neck. Grizzy Rage nerfed. That's very surprising. It was already kind of in a spot where it was somewhat okay, but they made it so that Grizzy Rage only starts cooling down after it's over. I would expect a buff here. Boulder, just no mention at all, so that's kind of just dead, I guess. Cataclysm seems to be some skill to look out for. This might be some actual like really good ultimate now to use for a lot of Druid builds. There's also ultimate cooldown tempers that kind of go with that. And we have a bunch of other like small buffs here and there that's kind of like round out the Druid class as a whole. So as I mentioned, Landslide seems to be like the shining star here for the Druids, and then everything else kind of like a bit behind that, but a lot more freedom, a lot more build variety, a lot more skills they can put on your bar thanks to the Shepherd change. And I think a lot of people were looking forward to that, including myself. So personally, I'm very excited for Druids, despite them not necessarily being the craziest in power. Here's the Necros. So I mentioned mostly the mobility aspects. Other than that, they are the Blight nerfs that will affect some builds. In general, Necros, yeah, nothing crazy is coming for them, it seems. Also, the new uniques don't really seem like super crazy right now. The one thing here that is kind of going ham is Bone Spirit. So there's some new interaction between Bone Splinters, Bone Spirit, and Bone Prison. So that might be a pretty powerful build, and maybe the best. And we'll see how this will play out. There was also a bug fix here for the Rapid Ossification and Bone Spirit. If you spend too much Spirit at once, then you actually did not really get the right amount of cooldown reduction. So now you'll be able to spam your skills a lot more when you combine those things. So that's really good. And that should definitely lift up Bone Spirit to a pretty high tier, I think. Other than that, I guess minions will remain powerful and Blight will remain powerful, but it does get a good chunk of a nerf. And yeah, in general, some other small stuff here. Minions are now more aggressive, they can overpower. I'm not sure if that will really have any relevance, to be honest, but we'll see. Some blood buffs as well, but yeah, I don't really believe in them right now. And this is kind of like the summary here for the Necro. Now for the rogues, so this is also the longest list, and definitely, as I mentioned at the start, they are the biggest winners here. So the first thing is Dark Shroud. Now you have a new unique that can give you 3 seconds immunity when you press Dark Shroud, when you have it on your bar. So that's a kind of interesting way of putting it on the skill bar instead of just having it, you know, on the skill tree and then proc from an aspect, for example. But also that unique can pull in enemies when you evade, and it's kind of like a crazy item, to be honest. So I haven't even seen the stats yet, but it's already crazy, I think. Then we also just have this buff here that a Shroud can only be consumed every 1.5 seconds. This is actually a really big line that in general will help rogues out a lot, in particular melee rogues. But on the other hand, it also makes rogues just like have an easier entry level basically, because rogues I would generally consider the hardest class to play, and they're not the weakest, but in terms of like the play style, they are probably the most difficult, I would say. And this line alone makes it much more approachable, I think, because this was definitely one of the kind of like main things defensively to be aware of and play around, to understand, you know, how many shrouds do you have at any given moment and how often do you lose them depending on what you're fighting. So dark shrouds being the main defensive mechanics, this was kind of like a very important to have like intuition for basically. And now you just don't lose dark shrouds only once every 1.5 seconds. So you have a very easy time using the Umbrous aspect, attacking enemies. Just have like 5 dark shrouds, you lose one, you keep attacking them, you get the 5th one back, you can't lose another one for 1.5 seconds. It's gonna be nuts. So rogue survivability just went way up, especially in situations where they were kind of the weakest, which was when they were getting barraged by many small attacks. And yeah, this is huge basically. This change alone. And there's a lot of small little stuff in there. They buffed dash, now you get like a crit buff there. You have a crit buff here now on the dark shrouds, you have a movement buff built in. So it's just like an all-round crazy ability, and it seems like there will never be any rogue build ever again that does not have dark shrouds for whatever reason. I guess that was already the case in Season 4, but now is absolutely the reality. So that being said, Smoke Grenades is also changing. It now has damage on it. In fact, there's also like some poison upgrade you can do with it. And it also works on bosses now, so that's kind of cool. So now you can throw it on the boss, you can throw it on elites, you can do some damage. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough damage to do anything. We'll see about that. But it sounds like a way better utility skill. I'm very excited for that one. Caltrops gets an interesting aspect that could maybe produce a DPS build. We'll see about that. There's also a new unique for rogues, for example, that allows you to like summon like a totem that you can hit with your abilities, and then it explodes for the damage you've done to it in AoE. So it's kind of like a wannabe shadow clone totem. We'll see if that will function properly and how good that will be, but there is definitely potential there as well for some really interesting builds. Dash is buffed, Shadow Step is buffed. You can potentially even think about some kind of like dash Shadow Step, like Helltide build even, to like, you know, just like fly around the map and everything that dies from that. So that sounds kind of cool. There are some heal potion synergies. You can press heal pots now to gain damage, and you can spawn heal potions, and there's some stuff like that. There's some barrier synergies now. You can maybe do something like that as well. Momentum buffs, I don't really believe in it, but there is lots of little cool stuff that you can get from momentum now for like pure melee builds, if you don't want to do like puncture plus flurry or puncture plus twisting blades, for example, or something like that. But we'll have to see. There's not a damage buff built in. There is an aspect for momentum that gives you a damage buff, but it will really depend on where that aspect goes. Currently in the game, this is a defensive aspect. If that remains a defensive aspect, but still gives you some damage, that could be pretty good. But again, we'll see. Rain of Arrows getting juiced up, and Arrow Storms. Now, I don't think that any of this will become anywhere close to like a meta build, but much more usable. So if you want to meme around a little bit with this kind of stuff, it could be kind of decent at least. Kind of cool. Victimize, I think I've mentioned, but they are fixing the double dipping, and they're buffing it by plus 50%. Overall, Victimize builds will go down a little bit as a result, but not all that much. So this is a pretty strong compensation buff here. 100% dodge, similar to the Barb tempers with Martial Vigor, and the Guttural Yell is still possible. So it seems like nothing changed on the Agile tempers. So 100% dodge yeah, can be done. Preparation gets a damage reduction buff now, so they're trying to make that more desirable. I guess the idea here is that you don't play basic attack, for example, and instead you just, for example, spam flurry or spam twisting blades with, you know, no basic attack, no might aspect. So I guess that's why they put the damage reduction on it. That's a nice little buff, to be honest, and I'm kind of excited to try out more stuff with preparation. I'm not sure if those preparation builds will be able to hold up against combo point or inner sight builds. In particular, combo points have remained relatively powerful all throughout, but I mean, we have seen some shifts here with inner sight builds popping up as well, so maybe preparation's time has come. Exploit weakness. You're gonna see some very funny clips of that. That has been redesigned to now execute all enemies around you when it triggers after like stacking it up or something. So that sounds very interesting. We'll see how this will go. Then we have Invigorating Strike duration buff, Heartseeker duration buff, and Twisting Blades return reduction and flurry size. Those are now utility tempers, leaving you more room on your weapon tempers. So that's pretty strong. And for example, now I can put Cult of Duration everywhere. Cult of Duration being a very powerful damage multiplier for your boss damage, for example, is already pretty impactful, and now I can get more of that, especially on those melee builds. Scoundrel's Letters might be a thing, because previously that was like kind of broken with some targeting issues and a bunch of little buffs all throughout the passes. So there's like more crit chance, more damage, more little stuff. In general, rogues are eating well this season, so that's kind of the takeaway here, and there's certainly a lot of stuff to try here. I'm kind of excited for that. And then lastly, we have the Sorc here. So Sorcs, I mentioned, it's not looking that good for them. They are, yeah, just like weak on defense, weak on offense. The one like shining star here of hope, I guess, is the chain lightning build. So that might be ridiculous, but we'll see about that. And then maybe some stuff with Hydras, maybe some stuff with Lightning Spear, maybe some stuff with Arc Lash. But outside of that, all of the existing builds don't really change that much. So Frozen Orb is still just kind of there, kind of okay. Same for Blizzard, and a lot of other builds that they have are just kind of like even weaker than those. So I definitely expect we're gonna see some big bump up here for the Sorcs in the final patch notes at least. For now, yeah, not really looking that great for them. There's also like some small general changes here. So Starlight Aspect, that was actually kind of like an interesting note here. It now works with overhealing. There's like a resource aspect that gives you resources based on how much you heal. That was previously capped when you hit maximum life. You would not get more benefit from it, but now some builds can produce a lot of healing. So if you want resources and solve it very easily and you have a bunch of healing in your build, this could be a really good aspect now. There's also a cross-class temper recipe. You now no longer have to make a rogue if you're playing a Barb. You can just get crit damage from this new recipe with a 1 in 4 chance. There's also Wound and Overpower and Ultimate damage. So this helps out, for example, the rogues with the No Witnesses Paragon board. New recipes and stats moved, and some of the recipe things moved around. So this has happened throughout all of the classes pretty much. So there's like some nice little things to discover here. Anti-Venom Elixir no longer stacks with normal elixirs, so you lose the potential for the plus 15% health buff. But I guess not that many people were using that because of the high ingeborate cost anyway. And a bug fix here, the percent damage stat no longer is ×2 for dots, which is not even necessarily a nerf, because that was kind of like coming out to be exactly the same value in basically every case, because they rolled exactly half of the damage over time roll. So that is just like a little thing to be aware of. And 2 bugs that have not been mentioned that will be fixed that I was expecting are Shatter double dipping. So right now Shatter is like kind of the primary reason why Sorcs can go to like tier 170 or something on live servers, because that's an insane like dozens of billions of damage hits that it can do thanks to multiplier double dipping. That has not been addressed. And also retribution aspect. So this is something that we've discussed recently. It double dips on bosses when they are staggered. This has also not been changed so far from at least the patch notes. So that sums it up here for the patch notes for now. As I mentioned, there's more little stuff. There's a lot of things I will cover in more detail, and I will go through all the classes on the PTR. I will dedicate at least one full day to each of them and see what we can do, see what we learn, and then, what will shape up to be the good and the bad in the meta in Season 5. But overall, I really have to say I am very excited for Season 5, just thanks to the general changes that they are doing to the game. A lot of the new quality of life features are amazing. And again, you can go check it out in the campfire chat or in my summary that I have already posted at the time of this video. So this is it for now. I'll keep you guys posted with more stuff. Hope you enjoyed my summary here for the patch notes. Let me know what you think. What are you happy about? What are you upset about? What do you think was missed, and so on. And of course, now is the time also for feedback for the devs. So they are definitely taking this into account. They're taking this to heart. So if there's stuff that is like out of whack or stuff that they have overlooked, I talked about the Sorc a lot, about the Necro and so on. And well, we'll see what happens with the patch in the end. So hope you enjoyed my summary, and I'll see you guys next time.